Hi everyone, Tracy here. So I hope everyone's doing okay. It's been an interesting weekend in my neck of the woods. It was our birthanniversary weekend, which really has put a kink in things for me. The current book I'm writing is a little bit behind because I spent the entire weekend prepping for our big family dinner and recovering yesterday. It was quite the dinner. Anyway, still catching up with that one and trying to get back into the writing today. It was 30 degrees below this morning. It was really, really cold. So it's a good day for being stuck at the computer and writing like crazy. I'm currently writing The High King of Britain, which is book 5 of the Once and Future Heart series. That's the King Arthur series. And I'll let you into a little secret. When I'm writing books, there is a stage that I get to. Every single book, this happens every single time, and it took me a long time to figure this one out. But I reach a point where the book sucks. It just sucks. You can put the expletive in front of that too. It just sucks. And I do this every single time, and it's taken me, well, I'm coming up on my 100th novel very soon, and quite a few shorter and longer stories than that. And one of the things that I've learned is that it's part of the process of writing. I'm not sure if other writers go through this, and I'll be talking about this on my writing blog next week as well. So I'll find out then if it's other writers. But for me in particular, I reach a point where, and I may have to get a little bit technical about story structure here, so bear with me, but this will explain it. I outline. There's two types of writers. There's plotters and there's pantsers. The pantsers are doing the opposite of plotting. They're not plotting. They, like Stephen King, they sit down, they start writing, and pretty much their first draft is their outline because they're trying to figure out how things go, how they fit together, what the structure of the story is, how it all turns out. And they do that in their first draft. Plotters, on the other hand, like me, outline our stories before we start writing. And I feel a lot happier doing that. I mean, anal geek me, so of course you can imagine I have to plot. And the fact is, I wrote 4 books without plotting, the very first 4 books I ever wrote. They all sucked too, by the way. But interestingly enough, the 5th book, I plotted. I picked up a screenwriting book and learned how to plot from that. And that 5th book was the one that won me a National Writing Award, and it was the first book I ever got published. So I was pretty much convinced that plotting was the only way to write a book, and I've been doing it ever since. And since then, I have tried pantsing one book. Total disaster. No one's ever going to see that book. It was just horrible, and I was uncomfortable throughout the entire process. So for me, plotting is a comfort thing. I need to know where I'm going. But because I outline before I write, there is a point where, now, I don't know if you have, here's an example. Your family budget, your personal budget. You can figure out exactly what expenses you're going to have for the next 2-3 days. It's very predictable. But the further out you get, like a week ahead, a month ahead, a year ahead, you've got no idea what your expenses are going to be that far ahead. So the further away you get from where you are right now in time, the less accurate your budget's going to be. Plotting a book is exactly the same thing. It doesn't matter that I have outlined all the big movements of the story. When I get to actually writing the story, there are a whole thousands of decisions, little decisions that get made. The color of her hair, how she feels about that person over there, how he looks, who is in a particular scene at a particular time and what they witness and how that changes their behavior. So there's all these tiny little shifts and changes in the story. Now, by the time I get up to close to the halfway point, all those changes are starting to build up. And that means that the plot going forward is very uncertain. And none of it, I haven't got a full grasp on the story yet because I haven't hit the halfway point. So things are not falling into place yet, even for me. So there is that point just before the halfway point where my outline is not very accurate anymore, so I'm uncertain about what's going to come further down the line. Plus, nothing I've written so far is actually pulling together and actually making sense the way it will further in the book, when all those things I have laid down start matching up and making sense and wrapping up storylines and character arcs and things like that. So just before the halfway point in every single book I write, there is a few days where I'm writing it and I'm thinking, this book just sucks. I want to throw it out. I don't want to read this. I don't want anyone else to read it. That's where I am today. I sat down this morning and went, oh God, this just sucks. It's terrible. I don't want anyone to read it. But because I know that this is part of my process, I sort of hung in there. And I think in a few days' time, when I get over the halfway point, I'll be a lot happier about how the book is going, because I'll start seeing the shape of things the way they are as written instead of how they should be in outline, which is increasingly more inaccurate the further I go along. So that's where I am right now, and coming right off the heels of an entire weekend off, I'm feeling a little bit, not quite out of sort, but there's a little bit of pressure there to catch up with the story and really get going on it. And that's where I am today. So let me just check some comments and see where we are. Audrey, hi, hello, welcome. And Heather, hello. Kathy, yes. Karen, hi. Anna, hi. Marin, hello. I think you were here last week too, weren't you? Welcome back. Drea, is it Drea? That's a pretty name. I might have to steal that one. Hello and welcome. I don't think I've seen you here before. Maybe, perhaps, I'm not sure. So, Audrey, characters take on a life of their own. Yes and no. Yes, they sort of come, because I usually cast the characters before, if they're new characters to me, I will cast them using actors and fantasy characters that I find online and stuff like that. So I've got a fair idea of how they walk and talk, but it's not just character decisions I'm making as I'm writing. There is all sorts of decisions, like where a scene takes place. Is it outdoors, indoors, somebody's castle, for instance, because I'm writing Once and Future King. It could also be, is it summer or winter? That makes a difference. And who else is there in the scene and what their reaction is to it. So it gets very complex, and as I write and make decisions. And actually, it's really interesting that I'm at this point in the story and talking about this right now, because retcons have got a lot to do with this, and I'll get back to that one in a minute. Yeah, to a certain degree, it's the characters finally sitting up and talking all by themselves instead of me driving them along. So decisions I made for those characters earlier may no longer make sense. And I may have to stop and do, quite frequently actually, I will have to stop and replot sections of a book to make sense and fit in with all the decisions I've made so far in the writing. And Marin, happy belated birthday. Thank you. It's it was a very long weekend, but very, very pleasant. So Kathy, aren't we all just our own worst critics? Yes, absolutely we are. I suspect I'm not the only author that goes through a phase of this story just sucks. So Anna, do you know at the beginning how the book will end? Yes, I do. In fact, the ending of a book is probably one of the first parts that I plot when I'm building my outline. Raymond Chandler, who was a noir thriller writer in what they call the classic age of Hollywood and the classic age of pulp fiction, he said the first page sells this book, the last page sells the next book, which is quite true. For readers, the impression that you're left with at the end is very important for your sense of satisfaction and enjoyment. I'm quite sure all of you could tell me movies and books you've read where they were great right up until the end, and then the end just, well, sucked. and you didn't want to, after that, you just wiped the author off, or you never watched another movie or another TV show in that series. Endings are so important to get that sense of satisfaction and catharsis. So yes, I quite often know my ending before I know quite where the book is even going to start. Sometimes even before I know who the characters are, especially for thrillers and stuff like that. CJ, so it's not just me. I can take a lot of comfort in that. Yes, you can, CJ, and I suspect I will find out when I talk about this problem on my writing blog next week that there are a lot of authors that do the same thing. It kind of makes sense that you get close to the halfway point in your book and you're very unanchored because you don't know what's going on coming forward, and what you've written so far still isn't making much coherence. So there's a very dissatisfying sense of things coming unglued. So anyway, any questions? So today is we were going to talk about retcons. Hands up if anyone knows what a retcon is before I actually tell you what it is, because I didn't until I read an article about them just a couple of weeks ago. And when I did find out what retcons were, it was kind of like, well, there you go. I guess they've coined a new word for the English dictionaries. Anyway, what is a retcon? So a retcon is it's actually short form. It's a compressed word that means retroactive continuity. Wrap your tongue around that and say it a few times. So it is a lot of, because there are a lot of TV series going on right now. There are a lot of movie franchises that are basically one very, very long story spread over several movies. I think Lord of the Rings really started the process. The Avenger movies is another good case in point. There's all the superhero movies that support that one, and then there's the whole spine of Avenger movies. Star Trek, the original Star Trek movie series was also one where there was an ongoing storyline, perhaps not quite as continuity linked as what the newer ones are. Star Wars is another good one. I'm quite sure that you can all tell me series that you follow that the ongoing storyline is incredibly important. But what's been happening lately is that some of the, because you have an official canon, and that is all the story events and characters that are the official storylines and characters up until the current point in the storyline. That is the canon. That's what they call the canon. Anything that happens around that, so fan fiction or unofficial books and tie-ins and stuff like that, they're non-canonical is what they call them. But anyway, the canon itself, quite often, particularly in movies and TV series, what happens is because you've got not just one writer or one person that's holding the vision of the entire series in their heads and making sure that it all hangs together, you've got teams of people, you've got showrunners, you've got teams of writers, you've got executive producers weighing in, you've got actors who are blowing cash on production who also get a say in what happens in the story. And sometimes what will happen is that there is a story development that they want to do now, but because somewhere back in the future, back in the past, in one of the earlier movies or TV episodes, they wrote the history and the characters in such a way that they can't do that now. Or they want to make a major change right now, say bring in a major new character because they got this really hot Hollywood actor that they want to bring on board or something like that. So what happens is they retroactively change the continuity way back in the beginning. They basically say, okay, going forward, this is the canon. So everything that doesn't match that back in the past, ignore that. That's not canon anymore. That doesn't apply. Now, the perfect example of this the Star Trek reboot. They basically said, everything that went before, ignore that. It's out the window. We're going to start the whole storyline all over again. That's a retcon. It's probably one of the biggest examples because that was like a whole movie chain they literally just threw out the window and said, well, we're going to do that again. Another one that did that recently is the X-Men franchise. They basically said the whole storyline with Jean Grey dying and Wolverine killing her, gone, that doesn't count anymore. We're actually going to kill her all over again in a new movie. So the sort of the reboot that Bryan Singer came back on board for, and the new movie that's just about to come out, that is going to be has basically retconned the earlier episodes where Jean Grey has already died. So now they're going to kill her all over again. That is another classic retcon. So now that I've told you what a retcon is, I'm quite sure that you can give me dozens of retcons that you know, that you've come across. It could be in a book, another TV series. So if you know of one, let me know in comments, because I'd be curious to know what other ones people have found, and if it's just a peculiar thing to do with what seems to be science fiction, futuristic, things like that. Let me have a quick look here. Audrey, Supernatural does that all the time. Yes, they do. Very good example. But usually they try and justify it in some way in story terms. They don't just go, oh, that doesn't count anymore, we're going to do it this way from now on. They sort of do try and make it make sense in story terms. So, hi Dinah. CJ, lots of comic series do retcon. Yes, they do, CJ. That's probably where the term came from. And particularly, I mean, X-Men and Avengers and all that are comic-based characters anyway. So I'm quite sure that's where the practice developed from. It's a little bit, I've got to say, I don't mind the Star Trek reboot, but there are so many reboots these days. I'm starting to go, well, come on, guys, can't you just be a little bit more original? But the movies cost so much money these days, they can't afford to take the risk that people will like whatever the original storyline is that they come up with. So I guess in that case, they're playing safe. Anna, like Nero coming back and changing the timeline in Star Trek. Yes, the Star Trek reboot, exactly. That's probably the classic one in recent times. So here's another question. Do you like recons or do you not like recons in general? Yes or no? I'll be curious to know what your answers are for that one. So okay, if I was going to do a retcon, here's a classic example. Kiss Across Time series. Brody and Taylor had twins, Alana and Aaron. But let's say, for instance, I suddenly needed I can't even think of a reason why this would happen, but let's say, for example, the next book I was writing, I needed to have a third person there. So triplets instead of twins. I could just write that book right now and say, okay, everything you know about the past where they were twins, you have to assume from now on there was actually triplets. So this third person, let's call him Alan, this third person, a triplet, suddenly becomes part of the canon and everything else is retconned. Really awkward, and I'm not sure how I would sell it. But here's something about the Kiss Across Time series, and here's something about my books in general. I don't do retcons. There's been a huge number of times where I have gone back to find out what I've written before and found out that it has completely screwed me for some absolutely fantastic storyline that I could just kill if I could write it. But I've chosen not to write it because what I've said before won't let me set it up. And I've found too that if I really work hard to find a way around it or to write the story in a different way, but still remain consistent with the books that have gone before, I quite often come up with more creative and different ideas than I would have if I just says, oh, I'm just going to rewrite history and make it convenient for myself. So my general rule of thumb is I will not use retcons. I won't just recklessly change the past. If there is an inconsistency there, it's simply because I have forgotten. For some of the more complex series, it's very easy, even though I keep series Bibles and stuff like that, it's very easy to miss some of the earlier details if they're the small stuff. It's impossible to maintain a completely accurate Bible, because the only way to do that would be to dump the entire contents of all the books into the Bible, which basically means I'm rereading all the books. And occasionally I do have to do that. I have to go back and reread all the books just to make sure that I'm keeping up with the series. And a good example of this is I just worked my way through the entire Endurance series. Dinah, do not pass out. Yes, I'm doing research and building up towards writing the next book in the Endurance series, but that's a while off yet, so don't get too excited, okay? But just to show you what can happen, the Kiss Across Time series was one of the ones where I wish I had been more careful about laying down the time travel rules in the earlier books. I was so offhand about it. I confess that when I wrote the first book, I didn't think it would take off, because by that stage I knew that for whatever reason I was not a big seller on Alora's Cave. So when I wrote Kiss Across Time, I figured nobody would read it. And I had fun with it. I loved Brody and Varys from the get-go. I loved Kiss Across Time. Very quickly wrote the next book and laid down even more awkward time travel rules that would just trip me up in the future. Then I went indie. Now, when it came to book 3 and all the rest of the books, I had to look at the first 2 books that I was getting the copyright back for and thinking, okay, how do I move on with this story? Because I had set the time travel rules up in such a way that I had completely shot myself in the foot. It meant that the time travel could only happen along those 2 timelines. So Varys's very long life and Brody's long life too. But what if they wanted to go somewhere else? What if there wasn't a story there that I could use in their timeline? And I mean, I couldn't keep jumping back to their timelines. So I started finding that I had restricted myself in all sorts of ways. So I started researching quantum mechanics, quantum physics, time travel, the physics of time, current theories, string theories, looking for ways that I could expand the rules without disobeying what I had already set down as the facts of time travel. And if you've read the series, you will know that as the books move on, I keep expanding the rules of time travel while still remaining consistent with what I wrote in the very original books. And I think because I just didn't say, oh, well, that doesn't count anymore, because I didn't retcon it, I think I've ended up with a far more complex and therefore believable time travel universe than I might have if I'd just wiped it all off and reset all the rules from the get-go. And that taught me that I'm better off allowing myself to be restricted by what went before rather than just wiping it off because it's inconvenient and won't let me do what I do. I think I come up with a better creative story because of it. So therefore, to summarize, you will never get a retcon from me, not deliberately. And if there is any discontinuity at all, it is purely by accident. So let's have a look at Heather. Yes. Not sure what the yes is for, Heather, but I like your enthusiasm. 2 exclamation marks. Anna, it depends. Audrey, yes, if done well. Anna, that would not work. It would be cheating. Anna, thank you for not doing a retcon. You're welcome. CJ, I will often skip reboots in theatres unless it's something I really like. I would rather watch new material. That said, books will often flesh it out better or say, oops, this magic thing happened and you missed it. I like that better than retcon. Do you have an example of that, CJ, where somebody said, oh, you missed that one? I'd like to see that one. Heather, no, we love the book as it was. I'm presuming you mean Kiss Across Time or the twins. Audrey, I do hate when they cheat and use a magical excuse to rewrite histories. Yes. And Dina just joined, but if I'm understanding, no, I wouldn't like it. So, Audrey, love the Endurance series. Yes, thank you. Dinah, ooh, yes. That's, I presume, about the Endurance series, Dina. Dina, can't time travel grow in how it's done just like most things do? Well, yes, and that's exactly what happened with the Kiss Across Time series, is the rules of time travel have basically evolved and expanded, and as the characters learned more about it and new characters came on board and brought their expertise and other things that I can't really say directly without spoiling it for someone who hasn't read Kiss Across Tomorrow, so sealed lips. And hence the time flow in the later books, yes, everything has evolved and got much more complex and more scientific as I've got further along in the book. Heather, the twins, yes, the twins. Thank you in Kiss Across Time, because it felt like the characters naturally figuring more things out about time travel as they go along. Yes, exactly, Kathy. And yeah, so it was, I mean, Varys is the one that wants to know how time travel works. He wants to know how the gears all fit together. So he tends to be the one that's driving the exploration of time travel, whereas Sydney just wants to use it for political power. So there should be some interesting conflicts coming up soon. Anyway, it looks like it may be a short day today. I don't actually have any news because one, birth anniversary, and two, I'm at this book sucks stage, so it's kind of, I'm obsessed about the book right now. And then I just wanted to talk about retcons and just see if you guys were familiar with the term. And it sounds like no one really knew what one was until today. Which doesn't surprise me, because I knew what they were in theory, like I've experienced them, particularly with Star Trek, but until I'd actually seen the word, I didn't know that's what they were called. So I thought I'd share that one. Now, if you hear about a retcon in the future, you know exactly what is going on. If you spot one in someone else's series, then you'll be able to stick up your finger and go, I know what she's doing. So excuse me. I'm drinking mint tea today. I did a lot of talking on the weekend. Can you believe that? And mint tea is good for the throat. So, okay. So, quick look at comments. Dina, did you make that necklace that matches your dress? No, sheer coincidence. This was actually, this was a birthday present, 6-8 years ago, long time ago. And then I found the material in a store, years and years later, and went, oh, wow, that's the same as the necklace. So I bought a couple of yards and it's actually a t-shirt, not a dress, but it's nice and silky. So CJ doesn't have a specific example, but it's common in comics to go back and say, for example, that so-and-so died, but there was a secret twin. And there's a famous one I just thought of that who here is old enough to remember Dallas? And they brought Bobby back and it was all just a dream. I didn't have a TV, never saw Dallas, except I tuned in once for one episode, and it was that episode where she woke up and went, oh my God, Bobby's back. It's all a dream. But it was so vivid. And I'm like, what the hell? So yeah, there is a famous retcon, and I had completely forgot about it until right now. To finish CJ's comment, or we have this microchip that fixes everything. I'd rather the authors just owned it and work with the storyline. Yeah, it's like I was saying, CJ, I find that if I let myself be restricted by what has come before, I quite often, it takes far more skull sweat, but I come up with a very interesting storyline as a result. It really makes you think and sorts things out. Anna, I like your necklace too. Thank you very much. Dina, any words on the current plagiarism? Well, I could be very self-centered about the plagiarism and say, thank God I'm just this tiny little mid-list author and nobody bothers ripping me off. So there is one thing. I have to be fairly careful about my comments regarding the plagiarism because there is a growing concern, opinion, mindset out there that says that all authors who are writing a book every 4 weeks must be using ghostwriters or plagiarizing to get them done. So I have to be fairly careful because I can't just stride out there and start swinging my fist saying that's just bullshit. But the fact is I work my ass off and I write a book every 4 weeks. I don't plagiarize. I don't use ghostwriters. And anyone who has read enough of my books will know my style and know that I wrote them myself. So I'm tending to take a back seat on the whole debate to a certain degree because it's sort of like Shakespeare says, methinks she does protest too much. And if I'm like screaming about, but I'm doing it myself and I'm not plagiarizing or not using a ghostwriter, then people might wonder if I am, which is not true. So I'm just waiting to see how the whole debate washes out. I don't think, well, for a start, plagiarism is bad, bad, bad. I don't think anyone should be doing it, period. But the fact is it happens. The using ghostwriters, believe it or not, has been a practice in publishing for hundreds of years. There's been ghostwriters as long as there have been published authors. It's just normally in traditional publishing, ghostwriters were very carefully vetted and their styles were made to match the author that they were supposed to be ghosting for. It was a far more controlled and quality with a standard of writing that the editors and publishers of the day maintained. So a ghostwriter just didn't get paid if they didn't bring their writing up to that standard. The part of the problem with this whole current controversy is that the ghostwriters are not really doing the job either because the author who's hiring them is not bringing them up to her standard. I don't think she had standard. I think the original author that is at the center of this controversy really didn't have standards at all. So the ghostwriters just handed in whatever they thought was appropriate. And because it was under her name, it was her responsibility. So even if she didn't know that they were plagiarizing, she's still the one that is up and liable for that. So it's a tricky issue. I'm just being very careful at the moment not to say too much publicly. And certainly I won't be wading in there screaming about that's not true or anything like that. There's no point disputing people in these sort of situations. So I'll be interested to see how it goes along with everyone else too. Kathy, I posted a thing in the street team about plagiarism. I'll have to have a look afterwards, Kathy. Thanks. Just a dream. It feels like I've been duped. Yes. I must admit the whole "it's just a dream" really made my jaw drop too, and I wasn't even watching the series at that time. So Audrey, writing is hard work. It is indeed, Audrey. It's very hard work. Anna, are your books protected? All books are automatically protected by copyright as soon as they are published. It's actually as soon as they are written. It is a native inherited condition. The copyright is for the way the words are arranged and not for the ideas. So you can't copyright an idea and you can't copyright a title. So anyone else is free to write their own story about time-traveling menage vampire families as well. But what they couldn't use, for example, is they couldn't use all the names from my characters. They couldn't use all my characters. They can't use the dialogue I've used. They can't string their words together the same as mine. They have to be what they consider to be artistically different, so creatively different. And that's where copyright cases hit the law courts, because making that decision between what is plagiarized and what is artistically different and creative is where all the law sits in law courts and trials about copyright. And I mean copyrighted. Yes, copyright is inherent as soon as the work is created. It is possible to register your copyright, but as the copyright is already automatic, there's not a lot of point, particularly as my books keep being revised and updated all the time. So I depend upon the natural and normal copyright. And of course, copyright laws are slightly different in Canada and Commonwealth countries than they are from the United States too. So anyway, okay, any more questions? We may make it just a short one today. I don't think anyone emailed me this week with interesting questions. I had a couple of, I always have lots of email, of course, but quite often there's questions in there that are too personal or too controversial, so I can't actually repeat them in a mailbag situation here, but there's always some interesting mail. So Audrey, how is fan fiction affected by copyright? In fact, Audrey, fan fiction is considered to be illegal, technically. But everyone understands that fan fiction is, one, it's not for commercial use. They're just writing it because they're fans. And that fan fiction does a lot to help build that universe and endear it in fans' minds. Although I think a lot of the slash fiction tends to make a lot of authors thump their chests when the wrong couples get together in fan fiction. But it is technically breaking copyright because you're using the author's universe and the author's characters and names and situations. But it's one of those little gray areas that by common usage and common acceptance, fan fiction manages to get away with it. I think if someone wrote fan fiction and started charging for it, they would be dead in the water. That would be the end. They'd get shut down, they'd get sued, they'd have to pay penalties and fines and possibly even go to jail about it. But because fan fiction is not for profit and for sharing just amongst fans, most of the universes that fan fiction exists for and is written in, most of them just turn a semi-blind eye to it, although technically it is breaking the law. So CJ, I do remember in Buffy the Vampire Slayer there was an episode where Buffy went between the world. The series was set in one where she was in an institution where she was imagining it all. Total mind warp. Changed the whole series. That one I enjoyed. I like it when it adds a new dimension to the story, not just how we tricked you. CJ, that reminds me of the episode of Supernatural where Sam and Dean slipped through a time warp and ended up in Vancouver, where they were 2 stars in a TV series about the supernatural. And they're like, and of course, Sam was married to the woman who played the demon in previous episodes, which is in fact his real wife. So there was all these nods to reality, and they had Robert Singer as the director in the show. It was hilarious. It was like a metaphysic twist while they're trying to solve the actual story in their actual world. So, and then they had to get back. But that was a good fun one too. Audrey, thanks. Okay, you're welcome. Not sure what sure, but there you go. I'm presuming copyright discussion. So, okay. Any more questions? I'm a bit light on today. I'm sorry about that. So, everyone's staying warm. There's another polar flux at the moment, or polar, whatever they were calling it. Like I was saying very early at the beginning, it's like minus 30 here today. The French Mistake. I loved that one. I lived in Vancouver for 15 years, so I recognized a lot of the places they shot. Yes. Yeah, it was good fun. Okay. So I think we all need to go get some cocoa and get warm. Well, I know I do. So I think for this week, unless there's comments, we'll call it quits. Of course, don't forget, even if I do sign off, you can still email me, ask me questions, discuss points, and also that this video will be available in replay in about, I think there's a 30-second delay, and then it comes up, and it'll also be on YouTube. So, Kathy, we finally had a sunny day after nearly 2 weeks of rain. Well, that's nice. It's in fact actually sunny here. We've had these beautiful cloudless days. It's just you step outside and it's minus 30, which tends to suck your breath away. So everyone have a good week in the meantime. Read lots of books. Enjoy being stuck inside next to the fireplace, because that, just sucks. I'm going to get on with writing High King of Britain and try to get past the It Totally Sucks stage. So next week I can report that the book is zooming on towards the end, if not finished. Quite often in the second half of the book I get on a roll and I want to keep writing it, so I end up writing the second half a lot faster than the first. And I will see you all next week, and we'll be talking about, theoretically, something far more interesting, or just as interesting. Anyway, now you know what a retcon is. I'll see you next week. Bye.